Hello, and welcome to the Mr. Micro Four Thirds channel. I'm packing a small package in a bigly way. And by that, of course, I mean today we'll be having a look at the Olympus E-M1 Mark II, a big camera with a small sensor relative to its size. So maybe I mean a big package in a little way. Either way, up front, I just want to say that this is currently my favorite Micro Four Thirds camera. Despite its size, it's a very great camera. And we'll get into that in due time. But for now, it is time to plug another YouTube channel. It's time to plug my brother's channel. Yes, I do have a brother. And yes, he has a new YouTube channel. He also does photography content and more. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check out his channel, Chang of Fools. There's a link to it in the description, and there'll be a card up there. So click there, open a tab, and check it out after watching this video. Or if you want, do it right now, but come back here at some point. Otherwise, let's get into the E-M1 Mark II. What is the Olympus E-M1 Mark II? Obviously, it is this camera right here. It is a Micro Four Thirds camera made by Olympus. Now we call them OM Systems. And it's a flagship camera. It was released in December of 2016. The E-M1 Mark II uses a Micro Four Thirds size sensor, or a 4/3 size sensor, and it is a 20 megapixel unit using a live MOS sensor produced by Sony. The sensor is supported by a 5-axis IBIS module offering up to 5.5 stops of stabe on its own, but it can also sync stabe with some lenses. It has an ISO range of 200 to 25,600, and it boosts down, dropping the base ISO to ISO 64. The shutter is good for 60 seconds to 1/8000th of a second, and that's mechanical. The electronic shutter brings that up to 1/32,000th of a second. Flash syncies can happen at up to 1/250th of a second. And this can shoot at 60 FPS with electronic shutter, AF locked, or if you like autofocus, it'll do 18 FPS with electronic shutter. And if you like autofocus and mechanical shutter, it'll do 15 FPS. And to accompany all this speed, the focusing system is a hybrid system featuring 121 on-sensor phase detect points. And they cover around 75% of the sensor this way, vertically, and 80% this way, horizontally. The display on the back of the camera is a 3-inch unit, and it is a 1.037 million dot unit. It's also a touchy panel. The EVF on the back of the camera is a 2.36 million dot unit. And yeah, it's pretty solid. With storage on the E-M1, or with regards to storage on the E-M1, we're looking at dual SD card slots. With the battery pack, this camera, the E-M1 II, comes in at 547 grams. And the battery pack that it uses is the BLH1. And that gives you 440 CIPA rated shots on a charge. And it's this thing here, pretty chunky. Lastly, in 2016, when this was new, it was 2,000 USD, approximately 2,683 in 2026 SAD bucks. That's about half the GDP of Canada, or about 3,660 Canadian dollars. I swear, we sold more beaver tails than 3660's worth. Maybe not. Operation and feel. There's no beating around the bush. The E-M1 Mark II, it's a big camera. In terms of other mirrorless cameras, we're in the territory of full-frame mirrorless cameras. For reference, this is a Sony a7 II. It is only 25 grams heavier than the body of this Olympus. When I had my EOS RP, that was actually 100 grams lighter than this E-M1 II. And if you hold these two cameras side by side, you can see they're actually also fairly similar in dimensions. All of them. Is that a bad thing though? I don't think so. Not really anyways. To be honest, I'm personally pretty happy with this camera being in this weight range. However, this may be my DSLR and medium format bias showing. When it comes to the E-M1, even though it's a bit big, this does bring some benefits. Because it's not trying to be small, the E-M1 is a ergonomic masterpiece, mostly. It has an excellent grip that you can see here. It's quite nice, it fits my hand, and it fits so perfectly. It feels like my hand was the reference hand when they designed this camera. It's seriously nice. And on the back, you also have a thumb perch, also very nice, and fits my thumb perfectly. Now, where things become evident that Olympus really knows what they're doing is when it comes to controls and the placement of said controls. Almost as if they've been making cameras since the Spanish Civil War. Where do we begin? Let's start with command dials. This is the best Micro Four Thirds camera that I've used to date. The camera uses a fairly normal dual command dial system. You got a front one over here, it surrounds the shutter button. It's a little bit angled and it is textured so you can easily action the dial. And it naturally is in a great place. My fingers automatically lean forward to use the dial. It's quite good. And that's not all. The back has a command dial as well, right here. Oop. And the placement is sublime. My thumb, again, naturally just sits right on the back of that. And it makes it easy for me to easily adjust without really having to think about it. It doesn't press in or anything, so I can just rest my thumb here and twiddle it as required. And you'd think this is fairly normal, but if you have a look at the A7 II, right there, that command dial looks like it's in a pretty similar spot, but I actually have to move my thumb with a little more intention to action it. And it's these little fine, small touches that really remind you that Olympus know what they're doing. Probably. On the back of the camera, you also get a nice array of controls and D-pad, and it's got a textured finish so you know what you're pressing. On the top plate, you get a few buttons as well. You get things like your red video record button right there, and you actually get another weird button on the left. It toggles the histogram. I was unsure about how I feel about this, but now that I got it, I find it quite nice. Now, moving on, we have the mode dial. It's quite good as well. While textured, requires a good amount of resistance to change, and I don't think I'd be accidentally moving this at all. But just in case you're afraid of that, this also has a locking mechanism, so it really won't move. Moving on, we have two more dedicated controls, as well as the power toggle. The other controls are the AF mode and the drive mode button. Now, Something I'm not actually super keen on is that toggle on the left. For me, I really do prefer having my power toggle on the right, or at least closer to my right thumb, so I can easily flick it on and off. As a result, I kind of tend to leave the EM1 on, kind of more than I should, or more than I'm used to. Anyways, moving on, looking at the front, you obviously have a lens release, but you also have two buttons over here. They're pretty well placed and are a good spot for my middle finger and my ring finger to press. There are also different buttons, right? One is a button with a divot and one is rounded on top, so you know what button you're pressing. Again, nice little touches. The only thing this thing is really missing though, it's over here. There's no AF joystick. Olympus was late to the party on that, with the AF joystick only really making an appearance in 2019 with the EM1X. But it's okay, because this camera also has some touch support. You can do the touch to focus, touch to shoot, and that's all fine and dandy. But really, the one that's the most useful without an AF joystick is the rear panel touchpad for AF point selection. And you can also do this. You can hold the camera up and adjust the focus point with your finger, your thumb. And this, again, is normally there to help compensate for the lack of an AF joystick. But I personally find the implementation on the EM1 Mark II a bit lackluster. You don't really get to customize the area of the touchpad when you have your eyeballs up to the EVF, and maybe it's just mine that's kind of weird, but I know my touchscreen works just fine, and I'm on the newest firmware. But from what I understand, really, as part of the system's anti-nose algorithms, it is only sensitive on the right side of the screen-ish. So what I figured out that I could do is that if I want to adjust the focus with my left thumb, I need to start it beyond the halfway point of the screen, and then I can drag the focus box wherever I want. And I can even go beyond the halfway point of the screen. But if I want to initiate a focus point change, I can't do it from this half of the display. And from what I can find online, it does have to do with the whole trying to negate the nose pokes aspect. But if you know otherwise, please let me know, because I'm a bit confused by this. And I also realize that if I wanted to, I could actually get my nose to move the focus point. So yeah, I don't know. Anyways, let's continue to talk about the touchscreen. On top of this lackluster implementation with the touchpad feature, it also generally is kind of meh. It does feel like an older system, because it is. You can't navigate the menu with the touchscreen, but you can navigate your quick menu. And it's mostly fine, but I am now kind of used to newer cameras where you can navigate the full-on menu with it. Additionally, if you are in image review, there's no pinch zoom. You have to use a zoom slider. That's kind of lame. And if you look at the quick menu, things are kind of close together, and it's actually pretty hard to finally tap on a thing. This is probably not bad if you're holding still and you can calmly peck, but I imagine if you're trying to do it on the move, it's a little more annoying. That said, the rear panel that the touchscreen is connected to is quite nice. I do like the flippity-uppity screens, and it is a overall, I think, nice solution. I'm a bit biased though, and even though I do like the tilt-only screens for photo times, I am, of course, doing this YouTubery business, so having the option to do this, it's pretty nice. But also having the ability to do this and fold the screen in is something I also tend to like. If not, just to help prevent me from chimping all the time when I shoot. And on that note, it's a perfect time to segue into the menus. So this is old Olympus menus, if you will. And yes, it does suck, but you do get used to it. I change cameras every 2.3 seconds, and even I can get used to this menu system. But I do admit, it's not the greatest to navigate, it's got lots of weirdnesses to it, and I hear that the new one that are on modern OM systems cameras are pretty nice, but I haven't used them, so I don't know. But on this camera, you get that odd Olympusness. You get Olympus symbology that at times requires you to actively Google or menu dive to figure out what's going on. Plus, you get some stuff that's just strange. Like, the anti-shock symbol is a diamond. Okay? And the electronic shutter symbol is a heart. Also very random. And in menu pages, you'll find that there's lots of space for text, but when you look down at the menu, things flip between full-on text to acronyms to just symbols. Why? Why do this, Olympus? Either way, you get used to it. And after a while, it all blurs together. So, Right, let's talk about the EVF. It's pretty nice. At this point in 2026 though, it's nothing special. It's very usable, you can punch in, you can do all sorts of stuff, and by default, it's even 120 Hz EVF. So the refresh rate is still, again, pretty modern. So it's a nice experience, but not a crazy one. It's not one of those 5.6 million dot units. Overall, when it comes to user experience, once you get over the menu stuff, this camera, pretty great. Now, I want to talk about one more thing, or a couple other things, but here's one. This camera features a USB-C port. It's over here, and that's cool. What's not cool is that it does not offer in-body charging. This USB-C port is effectively data only, which kind of sucks, but kind of on par for Olympus/OM systems. And again, all of this, even though it has some little niggles, overall combines to be a very good experience using the E-M1 II. But I want to go back to something that I said earlier. It's something that's brought up often when you refer to other Panasonic cameras like the G9, G9 II, GH series of cameras, and other Olympus cameras. And that's that these are big cameras on ostensibly small sensors. And I do think it's a bit valid, but I think there is more to it than just it's too big of a body. Because as we discovered, the big body does let you focus on ergonomics. And for the most part, I think the system overall still offers a lot of options to make a very compact setup, while still offering pretty fast lenses that as a whole are not very heavy, despite the body being so. And on top of that, a lot of these smaller compact lenses, like this 45 here, offer really good image quality. So it's not just like they're making cheap, tiny lenses that suck. They're tiny lenses that are good value and are great. I'm thinking things like the 20mm f1.7, an oldie but a goodie. This 45mm f1.8, which is a fantastic short telly at 90mm equivalent. And when you look at the E-M1 II, taking into account these kind of lenses, it still is really light and overall a small system. And yes, Micro Four Thirds does have big heavy optics that cost big heavy monies, but the choice is still there to go light and to go small, while still having great ergonomics. I love my Sony cameras, okay? I do not fear the reptilian skin tones. But when you factor in lenses, even though the A7 II is only 25 grams heavier, when you start adding in optics, the gap between the Sony system and this system does grow rapidly. I mean, that makes sense, since overall the optics on a full-frame sensor are going to have to be larger. And aside from that, the lenses being bigger does push the center of mass on these cameras further out, making it a little less balanced, where on the E-M1 II, the lens's mass tends to stay near the center, making it feel more balanced. And I think I've seen this demonstrated by Robin Wong on his channel, but overall, you can get away with a lot of optics in a pretty small package with this style of camera. And you can pack a lot of stuff into a tiny shoulder bag. Again, something I saw Mr. Wong do. You can pack things like a 14mm to 45mm to 20mm, and that can all fit in a bag while still weighing less than, say, a A7 camera with one 85mm f1.8. So I love my A7 II. I do not fear the reptilian skin tones, but when you factor in lenses, even though the A7 II is only 25 grams heavier, when you add a lens on top, the gap between the weight of these systems starts to grow. And if you use lenses that have a similar overall focal length, you'll generally find that with the full frame lenses, they're going to be bigger, and they're going to overall mean that more mass is pushed away from the center of the body. Where on the Micro Four Thirds system, the lens will likely still be considerably smaller, and the weight will be more balanced overall. And here's something that I've seen Mr. Robin Wong demonstrate about the overall system compactness by showcasing just what you can get away with in a small bag. And I thought we can talk through a similar thing here. So if we, say, want to go out and pack a variety of lenses, let's say 14 to 45mm, or in full frame equivalents, I want to have lenses that'll cover 28 to 90mm. And on Micro Four Thirds, I can pack 3 compact primes. Each of them I think have pretty good IQ, and combined, they weigh less than an E-mount 85mm f1.8, which is 371 grams. So, in my hypothetical kit, I can pack one of these, the Olympus 45 1.8, that's 116 grams. I can pack a Panasonic 14mm f2.5, 55 grams. And just for fun, I can pack the 20mm 1.7, 100 grams. And if you look at that and combine the numbers together, it's not even close. Those 3 lenses together weigh 105 grams less than a single E-mount 85mm f1.8. Admittedly, some of that is modern lens designs seem to have gotten bigger and heavier, but still, that's pretty nuts. In the same weight, or for less weight, I can carry 3 lenses than a similar Sony camera with just 1. So that's pretty cool, right? And I think it does showcase overall that Micro Four Thirds can still be compact and light, even if this body ain't. Image quality and autofocus. This is the only Micro Four Thirds camera that I have that features the 20 megapixel sensor. And I do gotta say, it's a good one. It is a fair step up from that older 16 megapixel unit. And I think it is at least competitive with the sensors of its era. The 24 megapixel APS-C or 26 megapixel APS-C units. Additionally, the one sensor in here does not feature an AA filter, so you do get that sharpity sharpness. I also want to point out that on Micro Four Thirds, 20 megapixels is pretty pixel dense. For a bit of perspective, the full frame A7R4 with its 61 megapixels features a pixel pitch of 3.74 micrometers. The E-M1 Mark II with its 20 megapixel Micro Four Thirds sensor is 3.34 micrometers. In terms of pure surface area, that means the A7R4 pixel area is 25% bigger. Or to put it another way, scaling the Olympus sensor up into a full frame sensor would get you around 77 megapixels. Numbers! There's so many numbers. And yeah, these are dense sensors. And I know Micro Four Thirds now has a 25 megapixel unit, but I don't have one of those. I got one of these. And in spite of how pixel dense it is, overall, I found dynamic range, I found detail retention, and I found most of the qualities of the images to be quite solid. Admittedly, yes, DR does still trail a bit behind APS-C sensors of its time, but it's really not that big of a difference. And with the right glass in front of these sensors, this can produce painfully sharp images. And files tend to have pretty reasonable pushing and pulling room as well. I also want to remind people, I don't typically shoot JPEGs, so I will continue not really commenting on those. I am myself a raw shooter, so keep that in mind. Now, let's have a look at some noise samples. Looking at the images from the E-M1 II, I think for the most part, this camera holds up fairly well in high ISO situations. No, it's not full frame levels good, but I think I'm pretty happy shooting at ISO 3200 or 6400. They're quite good for a Micro Four Thirds camera. I do find though that of the noise that is generated, there's a reasonable amount or an unreasonable amount of color noise. But even at ISO 12800, there's still quite a reasonable amount of detail in the images. And with a bit of noise reduction, I'd be comfortable with using this ISO value as well. But again, something to note is that even at lower ISOs when I'm pulling up shadows, I did see that there was color noise in those, and I would need to run noise reduction to reduce it. Luckily, raw therapy handles this fairly well, but it's worth keeping in mind. I would see some of this even at ISOs 200, 400 when I was pushing shadows. Admittedly, I might have just been pushing them a little too hard, but again, they cleaned up well enough. But another thing to keep in mind is just how good image stabilization is on this camera. If you're shooting static subjects, you can handhold some pretty crazy long shutters. I'll show some examples, but in the pictures that you're going to see, here's the context. I'm hand holding these, I'm at a desk, and I am bracing against a desk. But even taking that into account, I was able to hand hold a 1-second shutter. That is amazing. And although I will say I'm not someone who's currently super in tune with developments in iBiz, so who knows, maybe this is just the norm now with cameras, but when I compare it against something like my A7 III or older DSLRs with iBiz like the K3, the E-M1 II system is mind-bogglingly good. And as a result, in some scenarios where your subject is static, you don't necessarily have to use these higher ISOs if you don't want to. You can just handhold longer shutters. Brace yourself up against the wall and just have at it. Take a couple shots, and one of them's probably going to be good. Lastly, before we move on to autofocus, I want to talk on the subject of high-res mode. The E-M1 does support it, and yes, it's not the most up-to-date variant of the multi-shot high-res, but even still, this camera is capable of outputting 80 megapixel RAWs when shot in the multi-shot mode. And you have the option to pair it with either a 50 or less resolution JPEG. But more importantly than that, the multi-shot images, they are processed in camera and it just shoots out a RAW file. Even more importantly than that, I found that these RAW files can be opened no problem on RAW therapy. So that's really convenient. And looking at them, I think they're really good. And yes, since this is taking multiple shots, you do need a static object. So if you're doing things like shooting flowing water or moving traffic, you will get odd artifacts. But when the situation is right for a multi-shot, it looks really good. And just a throwback to another video, but looking at the comments I got from my CoolScan video, I think this camera might be a fairly good candidate to try film scanning. Now, as good as the shots are, coming out 80 megapixels, the question is it really 80 megapixels worth of image? I don't know. I don't have an 80 megapixel shooter, but I will say they do look notably better. They're a big step up from the single shot 20 megapixel images. So if you want a big resolution and your situation allows it, then the multi-shot on this camera is a really convenient solution. Seriously, the ability to just generate a single file from this composite in body is so nice. It's so nice, Sony. Why don't you do that? Anyways, let's talk about autofocus next. It's the first Micro Four Thirds camera from Olympus to do phase detect. And honestly, I think it's pretty good. No, it doesn't have modern animal squat detect or B-blink tracking. But for straightforward stuff like focus tracking based on the target that you locked on your focus box, I think it works pretty well. If you can place your subject in the box, the camera will reasonably track it. Now, despite not having the more advanced tracking modes, it can do some stuff. For example, face and eye tracking, it's there. And I think it does a reasonable job as well. Now, I haven't used this camera a huge amount for things like fast action. I mainly track things with pretty predictable movements or things that aren't moving at all. But in those scenarios, the single shot AF is quite good, very fast, especially if you're coming from a DSLR. And remember, this camera can also shoot at 18 FPS with focus tracking and its electronic shutter, or 15 if you want the mechanical shutter. Now, if you are shooting and you can plan your shot and work with the initial focus lock, you can get 60 whole FPS, which is nuts. One thing I will bring up though is that this camera and this drive mode selection is kind of complicated. I'm not gonna really go into it with too much detail, but here, just have a look. See that bottom line there? That is a whole thing of focus modes or drive modes. And there's more. There were more modes. But once you get used to it, and once you can figure out the weird Olympus symbolology, you got all the options in the world for whatever kind of drive mode situation you're looking for. And for those of you who are interested in a lot of fast action stuff, or just like the concept of the pre-capture stuff, Olympus does deliver that here as well, although they call it Pro Capture. And this is where you can pre-buffer while you are half pressing your shutter, so the camera will just keep buffering images until you press the shutter button. Then from that point, it'll buffer some images prior and images after. So you'll always have a ridiculously full SD card. Personally, it's not something that I use, but I understand its utility and it's something worth keeping in mind if that's what you're into. But with that, let us have a listen to the 15 FPS goodness. We're obviously not going to do 60 because that's electronic and it is silent, but here's the not electronic. That's pretty nice. I like that. The clacks are kind of muted, the amount of clunks, and it's not super loud, but it still feels and sounds kind of substantial, if that makes any sense. Video mode. Being a pretty modern camera, it does shoot 4K. It shoots both UHD at 30 FPS and DCI, the cinematic stuff, at 24 FPS. Although, it seems for best quality, you probably just want to leave it on the DCI output. That seems to be the way to go. Additionally, keep in mind that if your image stabilization mode is turned off, or you use just sensor image stabilization, you don't get any croppity crops. So you get the full width of your sensor being recorded. Whether or not it's line skipping or binning, I don't know. But you will get the full width. But if you turn on the stabilization mode, that includes digital stabilization, which I think is in video mode IS mode 1, you will get a bit of a crop. I believe it's 8 or 9%. This is actually kind of a difficult thing to find. But yes, there is a crop when you do use that mode. But I will say, with the digital stabilization and your in-body, it is pretty great. I personally enjoyed shooting the video on the E-M1 II because of this stabilization. It was just kind of insane, the kind of stuff you're able to pull off just handheld. And I think the output also just looks pretty solid. Now, just something to keep in mind, every video that you're about to see in the video gallery is being done handheld. I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm enjoying the experience and therefore I think it's great, but you can tell me if my video gallery is really just super shaky and kind of awful. But I think it did look pretty stable and quite amazing considering that all of it, again, handheld. Hello. Right now, we're on the E-M1 Mark II. I'm using the inbuilt mic. We've got the stabilization with the digital stab turned off, and I'm just holding the camera out. It should be doing face tracking. I don't know if it actually is, but it does seem to be getting me, and it looks, to my eyes, not bad. Anyways, in a second, we'll try this again with the digital IS turned on. Okay, so now we've got digital IS turned on, and again, I'm just hand holding this, doing a slow walk. And this looks even better, although we're now clearly, I am moving my arm further back to accommodate my head space. And let's have a quick walk. Recommendation and conclusion. We'll start with price, as is tradition. On average, on your internet auction sites, the EM1 Mark II can be had for around 500 USD body only in seemingly reasonable shape overall. On your used camera retail sites, I'm seeing more around 575 to 600 USD. That's overall a bit spendy, but I'll be honest. If you like Micro Four Thirds and you don't want to spend OM3 money or OM5 tool money, then honestly, I think this is the way to go. When it comes to image quality, it should be really similar to those other models. The sensor is a version of those sensors found on the newer cameras, and overall, this camera is much cheaper than those, and it gets you overall into a fairly modern ecosystem with this camera. You get a pretty reasonable array of features that, while aren't the newest, will save you quite a bit of money, as long as you don't mind not having those more advanced things like the newest autofocus system or the even better, apparently, IBIS. In short, I do generally highly recommend this camera for anyone who wants a pretty modern Micro Four Thirds experience on a relative budget. It is really hard to beat the EM1 Mark II. Again, that sensor is still very much relevant, being only recently supplanted with Panasonic's introduction of the 25 megapixel unit. On top of that, the camera really is good in almost every situation. It's a do-it-all kind of tool. Good for stills, it has great shooting speed, autofocus still pretty solid, and you get pretty advanced features. Again, that pre-capture and the IBIS. Even though it's old, it's still incredible. And hell, to me, the video on it looks pretty good. As long as you don't need like 6K, 8K, or whatever Ks are on now. If you just are okay with a 4K shooter, this could be it. Especially if you're just doing it casually on top of photoness. But for those of you who see this body and think it's too big, just remember the system as a whole can still be made relatively light. Admittedly, if you are looking for absolute lightness, then yes, maybe you should look for a smaller body like the EM10 Mark IV. But if you can accept the extra weight, you will be rewarded with extra comfort. And now, I get it. If $500 still not budgety enough for you, luckily there are many, many options in Micro Four Thirds land at many price points below that mark. But as it stands, like I said, this is my new favorite Micro Four Thirds camera. We'll see if it stays that way. I've been on a bit of a flat top kick and kind of eyeing up a GX8, something like that. Who knows? Maybe that'll supplant this camera. All right. This was truly a very long video, but what do you think of the M1 Mark II? Do you have a favorite Micro Four Thirds body? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, check out Chang of Fools, maybe do a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.